Welcome to the Bonhoeffer Show with Bill Hull. The show about stuff most people try to avoid, but can't because it controls their lives. Religion, culture, and politics. Why does Bill Hull host this show? Because he and Bonhoeffer hoisted a few brews together in Berlin. Nope. That never happened. Is it that Bonhoeffer's book, The Cost of Discipleship, both challenged and changed Bill as a young man? Well, yes, that is part of it. But it's primarily because Bonhoeffer called us to a costly discipleship, and there has never been a time when such courage has been more absent or desperately needed than now. Bonhoeffer famously said, "Christianity without discipleship is always Christianity without Christ." The Bonhoeffer Project is committed to turning leaders into disciple makers. Because if leaders fail to create disciple-making movements, then we have failed. So, ladies and gentlemen, here he is. He's still tall and good-looking. And yes, he is wearing German cologne. He's acquired a few more underlying conditions. But direct from his underground bunker in Long Beach, California, the man who once told Don Henley, "You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave," Bill Hull.
Welcome again to the Bonhoeffer Show. Here we are. Today we're talking about the intoxicated mind. Well, what does that mean? Well, we're right back into this discussion that the Apostle Paul sort of sets us up to have, along with my friend, well, not friend, I would have liked to have been his friend, but Leslie Newbigin, the great missionary, statesman, and scholar, talking about establishing a missionary encounter with the world. And why we have to do this as part of our responsibility as leaders. So today we've been talking about the idea that we need to make disciples, different kinds of disciples, because we live in a difficult, chaotic age. And because of that, then we need to engage. How do we engage? We engage, first of all, by not withdrawing, by not assimilating, but standing up, speaking up, and being counted. And the way we do that is that we start off with confrontation, not rudely, not with looking for confrontation, but because there's going to be a clash between the culture and what biblical worldview is. And so there is going to be this conflict, and then there'll be converts. And then we have to call out the idols. And we've been talking about, and this is where we move to the argument that Paul has, which essentially is that we are responsible to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And we cannot do this unless we get engaged. So the way this works is that then we have confrontation, we have converts, and then we have calling out the idols. And we talked about how Paul did about we are responsible to call out any idols that are in conflict with people knowing God. So God is angry about Romans chapter 1, about anyone or anything or any society that suppresses the truth and makes it difficult for people to know God. And this obvious truth is that he exists. The obvious truth is that he is to be worshiped. The obvious truth is that when we suppress the truth about him, then we come up with our own foolish ideas that degrade and destroy not only the human experience, the entire culture in which we live and the quality of our lives. Now, this is why the mind of our country, America, and largely of the world, is intoxicated. It's under the influence of other ideologies. And so here's what G.K. Chesterton, one of my favorites from the 1930s and 40s, Chesterton actually was born back in the 19th century and lived in the first part of the 20th century, was a great intellect, quite humorous, wrote some really good books like Orthodoxy and some wonderful books on Christ. And he said this. He argued that new ideas are actually more dangerous to the person who has not studied them because he has no mental filter. A new idea will fly to his head like wine to the head of a teetotaler. Boom. Now, I'm still in search of as to how to the culture has lost its collective mind. How does this happen? Chesterton's thesis is as good as any for a starting point. Intoxication has its virtues, he would argue. Euphoria, temporary illusions of grandeur, openness, laughter, and it has its penalties. Sickness, regret, crumbled documents signed while under the influence, and more serious maladies as well. But thinking and intoxication are not friends. There's a reason you don't want to have your pilot or your surgeon to be just a little more relaxed just before they perform. Not that relaxed, not in that way. A poorly educated populace is easy prey for new ideas because they have no filter. That filter should be the ability to do critical thinking. This is what good teaching and instruction is supposed to achieve in educating the young of society, but today's general populace and its younger generations are poorly educated. They do not think critically, and therefore their minds are easily intoxicated with new ideas. In fact, much of Americans' youth is cut off from our history, our past. It's a cut flower kind of a culture because they don't understand some of the reasons that the United States existed. They haven't been taught in church about the fundamentals of the Christian faith and what it's based on. They are defenseless to new ideas that threaten maybe a Sunday school knowledge of the Bible. And that is one of the reasons that morality is in decline. It might seem that we have hit moral bottom, but as we continue thinking about Paul's three-stage decline defined in his letter to the Romans chapter 1, I'm afraid we're not at the bottom yet. And I'm going to talk more about that after the break. Let's listen to Steve Simmons. He's going to tell us a bit about more how you can get involved in the Bonhoeffer Project, because we can't turn leaders into disciple makers unless we get those leaders into cohorts. So here's Steve.
We turn leaders into disciple makers. That's the mission of the Bonhoeffer Project. But before we can turn you into a disciple-making leader, we need you to be in a cohort. A cohort is a 1-year, 10-meeting, book reading, pray, wrestling, writing, planning challenge that has the potential to change you and thus redirect your life. Interested? Here's the process. Go to our website, thebonhoefferproject.com, and complete the application form. We will contact you. We will then help you select the type of cohort that's best for you. In person, online, or online school, which is asynchronous, so it's not affected by time zones and anyone in the world can access it. Oh, and training is now also available in Spanish. In the meantime, subscribe to the show, read one of Bill's books, and send us a question you want Bill or some member of the Bonhoeffer team to answer. And now, back to the show.
Thank you, Steve. The man with the golden pipes. You mean it could get worse? Well, that's what Paul is saying. Yes, it can get worse. He says in Romans 1:28, since they thought it foolish to acknowledge God, he abandoned them to their foolish thinking. This is the third, I'm not sure it's the final, cascade into moral confusion and then cultural collapse. Paul labeled it foolish thinking. And be sure of this, it is human thinking without divine assistance, because reasoning without revelation always leads to foolish thinking when that thinking is about moral foundations and conduct. What is even worse is the lack of moral restraint, the inability to curb that human appetite for power, to take any advantage, to get a better place in line, a more comfortable seat on the airplane, to be a U.S. senator rather than a state representative, a president rather than a secretary of state. What makes it all worse is the little add-on to Paul's description that unleashes an ugly catalog of pathology that is designed by Lucifer to destroy humanity, where he says he abandoned them to their foolish thinking and let them do things that should never be done. Now that's frightening. Let them do things that should never be done. Let your mind explore the category, things that should never be done. What comes to your mind? This statement goes backward to where we've already been, where it's described, and now forward to the moral cesspool he plans to name. It's compounded in what human creativity becomes a trigger for how. They invent new ways of sinning. So let's summarize. Things that should never be done plus invention of new ways of sinning. Let's do that again. They invent new ways of sinning. So we're going to summarize things that should never be done plus invention of new ways of sinning. This is all supercharged by the unrestrained exercise of humanity's destructive abilities. So very long ago, pedophilia was thoroughly rejected in our culture across the political spectrum from left to far right. Child molestation, adults taking sexual advantage of children, was considered the bottom of the moral barrel. It has been considered repugnant for a person like Jeffrey Epstein to exploit underage girls. And when photos of said girls are found in his property, it makes most people sick and proved his guilt. And even worse when you learn that many in the media and politics covered up his sins for political reasons. Recently, however, the unthinkable has become at least thinkable. There's been a lot of controversy over this Netflix series, Cuties. Now, I'm talking about this on the 21st of September. I wrote this a few weeks ago. When I read about it, now it's caught onto the national radar screen and people have talked about it and maybe have gone on from it. But a really important issue. The film advertising includes a poster of girls in skimpy dance outfits and twerking, and these are underage girls. These are preteen girls. Many are outraged, but its defenders say it's a French film. So just as an aside, whenever an apologetic is being put forward for a previously morally outraged work of art, the term French film provides some air cover. Somehow smut is more acceptable when it comes with wine and cheese. Back to his defenders, viva la défense. They say they are all just too exercised about this whole thing. And if we would settle down, it too shall pass. They are right. If critics, and of course those prudes who care about their children, would just cool down, this would become acceptable in due course. Before you know it, sexual child abuse will be a crime no longer. Pedophiles or philes won't go to jail. They will go to therapy. Pedophiles or philes will no longer be considered incurable. Now, I don't think anybody's incurable. I don't really believe that. But I think that it's a highly, highly rare thing for them to be cured. And when felons are released from prison, they no longer will need to register. You won't know they live next door. Just imagine a world where the only place left where justice can be done on earth, as in heaven, would be a federal prison where the prisoners take justice into their own hands. Now, this is an example of how unthinkable becomes the commonly believed and then finally encouraged. And this is really what goes on with Paul. He's talking about it. It qualifies into the rubric, things they should never be done, things that should never be done, child abuse. They are working with a knowledge that understands. They know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die, yet they do them anyway. Let's read it again. They know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die, yet they do them anyway. Romans 1:32. But yes, it gets worse. Worse yet. They encourage them to do. Encourage others to do them too. Romans 1:32. Their lives become full of every kind of wickedness. Sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception, malicious behavior, and gossip. They become backstabbers, haters of God, insolent, insolent, proud, and boastful. I hate to say it, but I've witnessed all this behavior among church leaders. Yeah, that's sad, isn't it? So this is not a social depravity reserved for the non-religious. It comes down to the difference between a community or society accepting these qualities as normative and ones where they are rejected. If they are officially rejected in the church and people are cautioned and disciplined when they exercise, then they are restrained. This is obviously what Paul is saying, because the first sentence of chapter 2, verse 1 says, you may think you can condemn such people, but you are just as bad and you have no excuse. Whoa. Now that's shocking. He's saying, look, all you religious types, you're all buttoned up, fastened down, and in line. You're properly coiffed. You look great. But listen, you're just as bad. You really are. No one gets a pass on this behavior. The difference are those who openly practice such things, which was what Paul's talking about. Approve of them and encourage others to do them. That's what he's condemning. He says they deserve to die. Now, the word that describes the world in which we are living is nihilism. Nihilism means nothing, the etymology of it. It essentially proposes that there is no absolute truth. Basic question. Is it true or false? Is it good or bad? These questions, people have a terrible time trying to answer these questions now. We innately feel this way, but we feel intimidated, like we can't speak up and say, that's wrong, that's evil, that's sin. Friedrich Nietzsche had it logically right when he concluded that nihilism leaves us only with the will to power. And that power is in order to conquer. About raw power. Morality then becomes utilitarian. Does it work? American religion in particular has focused on pragmatics rather than theology, and we are poor for it. Therefore, I've only heard yesterday that focus groups have concluded that the ongoing violence in the streets of America are hurting one particular party's polls. Therefore, they've decided to come out against it. Now, this logic is interesting. Your reason for taking a moral stand against violence is a concern of your own loss of power. I'm not saying the Republicans would not do the same thing. They are utilitarian as well. This is nihilism at work, because morality, justice, what you speak up about is determined not by conscience, but by personal and party advancement. And this is evil. I sit at night and I rub my eyes, shake my head, and what I see on television or read online makes me wonder how much worse could it become. It causes me great concern for our future, for my children and their children. The world is becoming a morally confused cesspool because we don't know history. We are not teaching history to the young. We are doomed to repeat mistakes. In other words, let's teach what really has happened in the past, not what we hoped would have happened had different decisions been made. Let's see it, the good, the bad, the ugly. Let's see it all. our young people need to understand this about the nature of human nature. It's not fair to expect young people to behave much better than they do in many cases because we have failed them. We have failed them in our public schools, in our churches, in the arts, in the films, in the theaters, the print media. The media no longer are neutral referees. They are wearing jerseys of a particular party or worldview. You know, the question from 1984, how many fingers am I holding up? As many as the controlling elite says I am. All right, it's time to take a break and hear more about how you can subscribe and also how you can ask questions. I mean, it's right there. It's a huge red button on our website, thebonhoefferproject.com. Go there. You can listen to all the episodes that you've missed, and probably that means a lot of them. And you can read the weekly column. You can do a lot of things. You can see about all the different opportunities to get involved in the Bonhoeffer Project. So do that, and we'll be back with you in just a moment.
If you want to expand the disciple-making movement, then share the show with your friends and colleagues. Hey, it's easy to subscribe. Simply go to iTunes or to our website, thebonhoefferproject.com, then click on The Bonhoeffer Show. Once you do, we will keep you updated with the Bonhoeffer Project's events, new materials and books, as well as the larger disciple-making movement current news. You can also access previous programs. And be sure to read Bill's weekly column, which is posted on the website. Remember, ask questions. Bill's answers are guaranteed to give you herd immunity, increase your IQ, and cause you to experience waves of euphoria. Well, not really, but his answers are really good. And now, let's get back to the Bonhoeffer Show.
Well, thank you. Well, I was just reflecting about history this past week. I've been reading a book about George Patton, big, thick book about him. I like history. I like history about figures, major figures, bigger than life figures. I've been, I can read about Woody Allen, a smaller than life figure, George Patton, a bigger than life figure, Winston Churchill, of course, bigger than life, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, MacArthur, some of the great generals, Eisenhower. Over the years, I've read many, John Lennon of the Beatles. I've read tons of biographies. I learned a lot about philosophy and about history and about popular culture by reading all of these things. But one of the things that really runs through them all is that appeasement does not work. And when I was thinking about this program in particular, we can try to appease people who don't want to really confront the subject matter that we've been talking about, and how God's anger is coming against society, and he lets us go from one level to the next level to the next level, and how we just keep cascading downward and downward and downward, and how his anger is going to be someday measured out against this evil as he destroys it, because he hates most God does. What he loves, those things that attack the thing he loves the most, his people, his creation. So when we talk about appeasement, I always think of that little piece of paper that Neville Chamberlain held up when he came back from Munich, and he had trusted the goodwill of Adolf Hitler. And he said, peace in our time. And of course, Hitler had lied to him. Hitler laughed at him, mocked him, and ridiculed him behind his back for his weakness. And they thought that, people have thought that about America. People have thought about us now as a weak country, as crumbling from within, much like the Roman Empire. But what I want us to understand is that appeasement does not work. Appeasement with the enemy, appeasement with Satan in particular, Lucifer. We don't go soft on the devil. You got to believe in him, of course, and also don't appease your children. Don't appease people who come against you. Don't become an appeaser, because it never works. Because as Winston Churchill said, what happens with appeasement philosophy is hoping you don't get eaten last. All right. God bless. And remember, follow Jesus and he'll teach you everything you'll ever need to know.
Well, we hope that the show wasn't too bad. Jane Hull wants everyone to know that if anything Bill said was offensive, she feels your pain. If you were upset by anything Bill and his guests said, well, mission accomplished. At the Bonhoeffer Show, we value irreverent, satirical, and generally inappropriate behavior. But when it comes to fulfilling the Great Commission, we don't mess around. Remember, subscribe. We promise. No private jets, no white suits, and definitely no toupees.